Pat, you've said that information without action is waste. Can you take us back to a moment in your life when you realized that you were consuming too much and not doing enough?
Yeah, so I'll take you back to 2011, 2012. I had just started my podcast and I was obsessed with podcasts. And you could tell because when you would check my phone and look at my podcast playlist, I was subscribed to over 40 different podcasts. And like many people, we want to try to consume all of that information. So 40 different shows from health to wellness to finance and, of course, entrepreneurship. I felt like if I missed an episode, I might have missed out on the next big thing, that golden nugget that I needed. But the truth was I didn't need all of that information. And what it was doing was it was making me feel like I was making progress without actually making progress, right? The learning was disguising the actual doing. So I eventually had to unsubscribe from everything, which is something I talk about in the book, and almost kind of like start fresh again and only allow that what is useful to then enter my life and my brain so that I can then apply it, right? Because the more stuff, and like the hard thing about today especially is if you're an entrepreneur, you get inspired really easily. So the more things that you're connected to, the more information you're absorbing, the more inspired you'll be. And you might think, well, isn't that a good thing? Well, not really. If you're inspired over here, and then the next day you're inspired over there, and then the next day over here, and the next day over there, and we're just kind of like bumbling around all these different things versus what would happen if we had focused inspiration on that one thing and gave it at least an amount of time to have a chance to do something like all these other things that we would want to do too. And, it's this idea of the difference between just in case learning, which is what most of us fall into, that trap, just learning just in case we need something, versus what I like to call just in time information, the thing that is relevant to the next thing that we're doing, because nothing else really matters after that. I think we've been conditioned to try to figure out the whole process first before taking any action. And my thesis here is no, let's figure out the next step. I mean, know where you want to go, sure, but you don't need to know the exact pathway there. Just know your next step, do that, and then you'll figure it out. For example, you had mentioned the SwitchPod, our invention that Caleb and I made. We didn't know how to make and manufacture a product. We had never done that before, but we knew the first step was to create something that actually people wanted, and it just had to have the right shape. So we cut it out of cardboard. We went to YouTuber events and just let people hold it. And that's what gave us a green light to move on to the next step, which was, okay, well, how do we 3D print this thing? We've never done that before. Okay, let's find a resource and someone who's done this before and ask them. Cool, we got a 3D printer and let's do this thing and see if it moves. And all the way up to marketing and Kickstarter. We had never run a Kickstarter campaign before, but when it was time to sell this thing, okay, let's find somebody who's mastered Kickstarter. We went to an event that had somebody who was keynoting who had kickstarted a physical product. So we got in the same room with them. We started chatting with them, building a relationship with them, learned so much in such a short period of time that we were able to go from concept in 2017 to selling this thing in 2019. In February of 2019, we launched it on Kickstarter. We had over 4,800 backers and had generated $415,000 in 60 days. And again, we had never done anything like that before, but we were learning as we were going instead of learning everything. And then, I feel like if we learned everything that we needed to do and then decided to go forward, we would have just been like, no, this is too much. Like I'm overwhelmed.
It's an incredible success story. When trying to, I guess, make a differentiation between just in case versus just in time, being like too overly focused on trying to learn versus just going forward and taking action, even if it's something that you've never done before, you recommend asking yourself the question, if this were easy, what would it look like?
Yeah, that's a question that's really important to me in my life. It was offered to me by Tim Ferriss. And as somebody who is a hoarder of content, or previously was, somebody who gets inspired by other things very easily and wants to do a lot of things, I had spoken to Tim and he had asked me this question that he's talked about many times before on his show. And it is, if this were easy, what would it look like? And it's such a valuable question because we tend to overcomplicate things. When I was writing my first ebook, technically I've written 5 books if you count my architectural study guide, in fact. But when I was writing that guide, I had never published a book before. And I was thinking about, okay, well, I'm going to get bogged down if I think about, okay, how do I market this? How do I format it? How do I make it look good? I didn't know how to do any of that stuff. My only next step that I needed to know was, how do I write a good study guide? And I'm just going to use Microsoft Word to do it, which is exactly what I did. And going back to Tim's question, if this were easy, what would it look like? I would just write on something I knew how to write already, which was Microsoft Word. And then from there, it was like, okay, once I have this book, which by the way, lit a fire under me because I had this thing ready to sell. And it drove me to find out what the next steps were, which were, okay, well, let's get this on my website, my architecture website. If this were easy, what would it look like? Would I hire a sales team? Would I do phone calls and all these other things that are just overwhelming, out of my comfort zone and complicated? Or could I just stick a button on my website and go from there? Well, that's exactly what I did. Eventually, I learned certain web pages were more popular than others for where to put these buy now buttons. And lo and behold, in that first month that I launched my very first business in 2008, which was, again, a study guide for architects, I had made $7,805 that month just from a PayPal button on that website. Later, I added all those more complicated automations and other things to kind of fine tune it. But it got me started. It got me excited. It got me some small wins that I can then move to get that momentum forward into more complicated things later.